Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Zihik stared at the screen displaying the current rankings of the dogfight simulator and sighed, knowing his treasured 10th place in the interspecies standings was about to be lost, all because of a reckless human pilot. He blamed his superiors, of course, those who had decided he was the perfect partner for the first human pilot to ever join their ranks. The red light of the display washed over his yellow-green skin, highlighting the intricate pattern of spots that ran from his temple down to his neck, a pattern unique to him, like a fingerprint that had once made his mother so proud. She had called it the constellation of success. The irony wasn't lost on him that those same markings might now witness his fall from the only ranks that mattered. The Military Integration Committee had been pushing for human inclusion for years. Humans, the brash newcomers to this side of the galaxy, were eager to prove themselves, too eager in Zihix's opinion. As if that wasn't enough, the Integration Committee had paired Zihix with this human. His family had served with distinction for 7 generations. His father had often told him,
"Reputation is built over centuries, but can be destroyed in an instant."
And now, his career trajectory, his family honor, his very standing among females of marriageable age, all of it potentially ruined because someone upstairs thought it would be politically advantageous to pair him with humanity's first test pilot in the elite interspecies squadron. His two-toed feet shifted anxiously on the cushioned floor of the training center. Around him, the cavernous hall was filled with activity as pilots from all corners of the galaxy hurried to training sessions, briefings, or, like him, to meet new partners they hadn't asked for. Sighing yet again, Zihix decided to sit on an uncomfortable bench in front of the full-immersion sim room and wait for his partner, or, rather, his burden to carry. He didn't know much about humans, not a lot except for how they looked like. The Academy's xenobiology course had covered humans briefly. Something about them evolving on a mid-gravity world with moderate axial tilt and predominantly nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. Nothing special there. He knew that unlike his own yellow skin filled with green spots, humans had skins of uniform color across their body, with varied colors among individuals. Some were reportedly as pale as lunar dust, others as dark as deep space. A fascinating evolutionary adaptation, but one that seemed pointlessly diverse to Zihix. He only knew humans were one of those species with a patch of hair on top of their heads. Not a rare trait by any means, but one that Zihix and his people were incapable of not seeing as unhygienic. How were they able to keep the gaps among the strands clean after all? Zihix's species' bald heads and antennae could simply be washed with a few seconds of effort, and he couldn't imagine how much effort cleaning all those strands would require. Did they wash each strand individually? The thought made his skin flinch. Zohixians prided themselves on their cleanliness. It was one reason they excelled in sterile environments like spacecraft cockpits. The constant background chatter of the training center faded as Zihix retreated into his thoughts. As he kept himself entertained with his preconceived ideas of humanity, the gentle pressure of a hand on his shoulder startled him. He looked up sharply, his antennae lowering in surprise, the sensitive organs instantly sampling the air for the distinctive scent markers of potential threat. Standing over him was a human, dressed in casual clothing. The insignia on the collar indicated a recent transfer, confirming Zihix's worst fear. This was indeed his new partner. The human's clothes were immaculate, Zihix had to admit, with precise creases and polished insignia. At least they seemed to understand basic military decorum. The human was slightly taller than him, perhaps by 5 or 6 centimeters, not enough to be intimidating, but enough to be noticeable. The human male's eyes were what caught his attention most, a warm hazel color that seemed to contain flecks of gold and green. so different from Zihix's solid grey ones. "Lieutenant Peter Kowalski," the human said, offering a hand in what Zihix recognized as the traditional human greeting gesture. Another bizarre custom that involved unnecessary physical contact. "If I'm not mistaken, you must be Lieutenant Zihix. I was told we'd be partners for the upcoming simulation runs." The human's voice had an unusual resonance, deeper than a Zoexian's. The standard translator implant rendered it perfectly natural words, of course, but it couldn't entirely mask the distinctive human vocal patterns. There was a confidence there, perhaps even a hint of eagerness that set Zihix's nerves on edge. Eagerness got pilots killed. Calm, methodical precision kept them alive.
"I am indeed the unfortunate partner,"
Zihix replied, his translator perfectly conveying his annoyance. He made no attempt to take the offered hand, leaving it hanging awkwardly between them.
"And while I apparently have no say in this arrangement, I do believe I still have the right not to be touched without permission."
Peter's face changed immediately, the smile fading as a look of genuine concern replaced it. His hand dropped to his side as if it had suddenly become heavy. The reaction was faster and more sincere than Zihix had expected. Perhaps humans were more perceptive to social cues than he'd been led to believe. "I'm sorry," he said, taking a step back to give Zihix more space. "That was inappropriate of me. I wasn't told my partner didn't want me." There was a note of hurt in the human's voice that pierced through Zihix's irritation. He felt a twinge of guilt at the human's wounded tone, and his antennae drooped slightly, an involuntary reaction of discomfort that he immediately tried to correct.
"It's not about you specifically,"
Zihix clarified, making a conscious effort to sound less hostile.
"It's the idea of participating in a ranked simulation match alongside a newbie human that concerns me."
"Hold on now. I may be new to this unit, but I'm technically an ace. 5 confirmed kills, and all of them in a single engagement." He paused, then added in a quieter voice.
It's true that I destroyed my craft and crash-landed on a hostile alien world afterward,
"But I'm still an ace. You have nothing to worry about having me as a partner in a simulated match of all things." Zihix felt 2 conflicting emotions rise within him. On one hand, he was impressed. 5 kills in a single engagement was no small feat. On the other hand, the casual admission of destroying his craft only confirmed Zihix's fears. It was exactly the kind of recklessness that the stories about human pilots described. They would achieve exceptional results and then throw it all away with some unnecessary risk or showboating maneuver. His grandfather had once encountered human pilots during a joint operation in the Perseus sector.
"They fly like they're immortal,"
he told Zihix,
"and die proving they're not."
The old admiral had admired their courage but questioned their wisdom. Now, faced with one of these legendary daredevils, Zihix found himself experiencing the same conflicted assessment.
"This isn't just a simulation to me,"
Zihix said, rising to his feet. Though still shorter than the human, he felt the need to minimize the height difference. Standing, his ceremonial rank markings, delicate pinstripes running down the sides of his uniform, now close enough to Peter's eyes.
"There's a huge difference between being in the top 10 of the rankings and falling below. Females of my species won't even look at pilots outside the top 10.
This was only partially true. Females would certainly look at him. His family name alone guaranteed that. But the truly desirable matches, the ones with females from the most prestigious lineages, those would be closed to him if he fell in the rankings. He jabbed an accusatory finger toward Peter.
Having your craft destroyed would penalize us severely in the scoring algorithm, and whatever this ace thing is, I doubt it means anything more than being a typical reckless human."
The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Zihix wasn't normally so confrontational, but the stress of the situation, the potential humiliation, the disappointed faces of his family that he could already imagine, had eroded his usual diplomatic reserve. Peter laughed, a sound that seemed to echo off the high ceiling of the training area.
Of course this is to be about women,
Peter said, shaking his head. There was something in his tone, amusement mixed with understanding, that suggested this was a familiar concept to him.
Listen, I promise I won't destroy our craft if these fictional fights are so important to you.
Despite the layers of translation between their native languages, Zihix could detect the mocking tone in Peter's voice, as if the importance he placed on the simulations was somehow amusing. He couldn't tell whether the human was doing it in bad faith, but it was enough to worsen his already low expectations of Peter's performance.
I will do as I've been ordered by my superiors,
Zihix said flatly, retreating into the formal language of military protocol, a safe harbor for a Zoexian in uncomfortable social waters.
But don't expect any sort of friendly relationship with me.
He rose from his seat and pointed to the simulation room.
Let's just get this over with.
If that's what you want,
Peter replied, and Zihix noticed the human's eyes seemed to dim a little, a subtle sadness appearing in them. It was disconcerting how expressive human faces were, like watching a holo display, cycling through emotional presets.
But I hope you'll change your mind. There are a few things worse than having a partner who hates you fighting by your side, even in a simulation.
Zihix silently agreed with the statement, but didn't voice it. Instead, he walked ahead toward the simulation room, his steps quick and purposeful. The sim room door recognized his biometric signature and slid open. He pushed into a sterile chamber with just 2 seats and 2 helmets equipped with neural interfaces that would connect directly with their translators. The room was designed for maximum focus. Plain white walls, no windows, nothing to distract from the immersive experience that would soon replace reality. Taking a seat on the left side, the command position according to Alliance protocol, Zihix began preparing the settings for the official match. He heard Peter enter behind him, the soft click of the door lock engaging without being prompted. The human knew basic protocols, at least. That was something. The control panel responded to Zihix's touch, illuminating with the familiar white glow of the settings interface. He navigated through menus quickly, setting up the parameters for their simulation. 2 pilot craft, standard armament, space environment. His fingers moved automatically while his mind continued to dwell on his predicament. Zihix made a concerted effort not to look at Peter, preferring the awkward silence to any attempt at friendship. Awkwardness was preferable to disappointment, he had found over his years in service. Better to expect nothing and be surprised than to hope and be let down. It was a philosophy that had served him well in the military, if not in his personal life. The silence was only interrupted when Zihix was selecting the difficulty of their match. His finger hovered over the easy setting, a sensible choice for a first run with an unfamiliar partner, when Peter's hand suddenly clamped down on his, forcing him to look up. The unexpected contact sent a jolt through Zihix, not just the cultural impropriety of it, but the sheer physical surprise. Human hands were warmer than Zoaxian ones, he noted absently, and the 5 fingers felt strange against his 3.
What are we? Children playing games or professional pilots?
Peter asked, his other hand already selecting hard without even consulting Zihix. The human's tone held a challenge, as if he were daring Zihix to admit to wanting an easier setting. Anger boiled inside Zihix, his yellow skin darkening with emotion around his neck, a physiological response his species had never evolved to hide. Among Zoaxians, such a display would be immediately recognized as profound displeasure, a warning sign to back off. He wondered if the human even understood what he was seeing.
I've already explained how important this simulation is to me,
he said through clenched teeth, each word precisely enunciated despite his anger.
It appears you want to ruin my score on purpose.
Peter released his hand, holding up both of his own in a human gesture of placation that Zihix recognized from cultural briefings.
I'm not doing any of that. I selected hard because I know we've got this.
The confidence in the human's voice was infuriating. How could he know anything? They'd never flown together, never practiced, never even discussed basic tactics. Yet here he was, making decisions that could impact Zihix's entire future, with the casual assurance of someone choosing a meal option.
I doubt it.
Zihix shot back, massaging his hand where the human had gripped it.
You only did it because you have no reputation to lose here.
It was a low blow, and Zihix knew it, but the fear of failure, of disappointing his family, of losing status among his peers, it was overwhelming. 7 generations of elite pilots, and he might be the one to break the chain.
That's just not true, Peter replied, his voice gaining an edge. As the first human to join this group, a lot of people have high expectations of me, and there are plenty who want to see me fail.
He leaned forward, his hazel eyes locking with Zihix's grey ones.
It's fine if you don't want to be my friend, but all I ask is that you trust me this once.
Trust. Such a simple word for such a complex concept. Trust was what kept pilots alive in the void between stars. Trust was what made the difference between a successful mission and a disaster. Trust was not something Zihix gave easily, especially not to someone from a species with a reputation for recklessness. But there was something in the human's eyes, a determination, perhaps even a hint of desperation, that gave Zihix pause. Perhaps, like him, this human was carrying the weight of expectations. Zihix just shook his head and put the virtual helmet on, ending the conversation. Some thoughts were better left unexpressed. The neural interface connected instantly, a familiar tingle running down his spine as the simulation engaged. The technology bypassed his physical senses, creating a direct link to his brain that would make the simulation indistinguishable from reality. The room melted before his senses, reality dissolving into digital constructs. A moment of disorientation, a brief vertigo that all pilots learn to suppress, and then a new environment materialized around him. Zihix found himself seated in a standard hybrid fighter, the newest model that could perform atmospheric entry and handle fights in both planetary atmospheres and the vacuum of space. The cockpit was state-of-the-art, a perfect blend of data displays and tactile controls. The duo cabin was designed with interspecies compatibility in mind, with adjustable seating and control interfaces that adapted to the physiological requirements of various races. Zihix's seat was already configured to his personal specifications, the controls positioned for his 3-fingered hands. He looked around, taking in the details of the simulator. Through the transparent canopy, he could see a vast star field. They would be starting in space. Red giants, white dwarfs, and the distant smudge of a nebula created a breathtaking backdrop for what was about to unfold. The simulation was perfect, down to the subtle vibration of the idle engines, and the slight resonance of the control yoke as he tested it. He waited for Peter's avatar to materialize in the seat beside him, his antennae stiff, just like the rest of his body. Despite his misgivings, despite his fears and prejudices, a small part of him was curious. What would this human do? Would he live up to the reputation of his kind, brutish and reckless? Or would he surprise Zihix with something entirely unexpected? Peter's avatar materialized in the co-pilot seat, his digital form looking just as confident as his physical one had moments before. The simulation had rendered with detail, from the slight crease in his uniform to the determined set of his jaw. It was unnerving how realistic these simulations had become. A mission briefing flashed across the main display between them. Zihix scanned it quickly, his antennae moving from side to side as he absorbed the information.
Mid-sized pirate vessel with 3 fighter escorts,
he summarized aloud, partly for Peter's benefit and partly to organize his own thoughts.
Our objective is to neutralize the threat.
So we go in with our guns blazing?
Peter asked, already examining the weapons system. Zihix's skin darkened slightly at the suggestion.
Absolutely not. Standard protocol for engagement with superior numbers is to eliminate one target and retreat with our ship intact. That counts as a victory in this scenario.
Peter frowned, his face showing the same range of expressions as his real one.
That's it? One fighter and we run? Seems like a waste of fuel.
The point is to survive,
Zihix explained, not bothering to hide his exasperation.
A ship and crew that survive can fight another day. This isn't about heroics.
I think it's about points, Peter corrected him. At least for you.
Zihix decided to ignore the jab.
I'll take lead on this mission. My experience with these simulations...
Actually, Peter interrupted, I think I should lead.
Zihix's antennae went rigid with indignation.
On what grounds?
Simple reasoning,
Peter replied. His voice was calm but firm.
Your superiors paired us together for a reason. They want to see what I can do. If we play it safe under your lead and just take out one fighter, they'll just make us run this again until they see what they want from me.
Zihix started to protest, then stopped, considering. The human's logic was irritatingly sound. The Integration Committee would indeed expect more than the bare minimum from their first human pilot, and the sooner they saw whatever it was they wanted to see, the sooner this partnership could end.
Fine,
Zihix conceded reluctantly.
But we still follow basic protocol. No unnecessary risks.
Peter's simulated face broke into a grin.
Of course not. Only the necessary ones.
Before Zihix could inquire what exactly that meant, a countdown appeared on the display. 3, 2, 1. Mission start. Access to the virtual cockpit unlocked around them, all systems engaging simultaneously. Their fighter remained in stealth mode, drifting silently through the simulated void, the pirate vessel still unaware of their presence.
I'll handle propulsion and maneuvers,
Peter said, his hands moving over the controls naturally.
You take weapon systems. You seemed pretty handy with them in previous simulations, based on your rankings.
Zihix was surprised by the compliment, but quickly refocused.
What's your approach?
Peter's eyes gleamed with something that made Zihix's stomach tighten with apprehension.
We go in fast, strike hard. I'll use the secondary weapons to take one target while you take another with the primary guns. 2 kills in the initial confusion.
That's not protocol,
Zihix protested.
We're supposed to...
Trust me,
Peter said. That same phrase again.
I've studied these scenarios. I know their blind spots, their weaknesses. We can do this.
Before Zihix could object further, Peter had engaged the engines. The fighter surged forward, accelerating at a rate that would have triggered warning alarms in a training scenario. But this wasn't training anymore. This was evaluation. The safety restrictions were off. Zihix's fingers hovered over the weapons controls, anxiety mounting as they closed in on the pirate formation. The enemy fighters were arranged in a standard escort pattern around the larger vessel. Predictable, at least. He had to admit that much.
Ready on primary weapons,
he reported, falling back on his training to calm his nerves.
Secondary weapons locked,
Peter confirmed.
Strike on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
Peter fired first, a burst from the secondary energy cannons that seemed woefully inadequate against the shielded fighter. Simultaneously, Zihix unleashed a barrage from the primary weapons, striking his target directly amidships. The pirate fighter erupted in a brilliant explosion, its reactor core breached. But what shocked Zihix was Peter's target. It was already spinning out of control, venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches before exploding in a similar fashion.
How?
Zihix began, genuinely confused. The secondary weapons shouldn't have been capable of that kind of damage with a single burst.
Told you I studied their designs,
Peter replied, already swinging their fighter around for another approach.
These Graxin 7 pirates have a structural weakness where the port thruster housing meets the main hull. Hit it before the shield reaches full power, and the conduits will overload.
Zihix stared at his human counterpart with newfound respect. That kind of detailed knowledge wasn't included in standard briefings. Peter must have done significant research before this simulation.
The main vessel is raising shields,
Zihix reported, watching the pirate ship's energy signature change on his display.
and the remaining fighter is moving to intercept. We've accomplished the mission parameters. We should retreat now.
Peter shook his head, still focused on the controls.
We're not done yet.
What? That wasn't the agreement,
Zihix protested.
We've destroyed 2 fighters. That's double the requirements.
I never said we'd stop there,
Peter replied, his voice maddeningly calm as he executed a series of evasive maneuvers that sent their craft spiraling between enemy laser fire.
We can at least take out that last fighter.
This is exactly the kind of recklessness I was worried about,
Zihix snapped, his skin flushing darker with anger.
This is how you lost your previous ship, isn't it?
Peter didn't answer, too busy plotting an intercept course for the remaining fighter. Zihix had no choice but to ready the weapons again, cursing silently in his native tongue. The third fighter proved more challenging. Without the surprise factor, the guns weren't as effective. Peter responded by pushing their engines beyond recommended parameters, executing maneuvers that slammed Zihix against his restraints, despite the inertial dampeners. The G-forces grew stronger as Peter tightened their turn radius, attempting to get behind the remaining fighter. Zihix felt his consciousness beginning to fade, grey creeping in at the edges of his vision. Zoexians had evolved on a lower gravity world than humans, and their physiology wasn't designed for the kind of acceleration. Peter seemed to be handling it significantly better. Zihix fought against the encroaching darkness, focusing on the weapons controls, determined not to be the weak link. He managed to squeeze off a burst that clipped the enemy fighter's wing before the G-forces overtook him. His vision went black. When awareness returned, mere seconds later according to the chronometer, Peter had somehow maneuvered them directly behind the third fighter.
Nice shooting,
Peter called out, apparently unaware that Zihix had momentarily lost consciousness.
Finish him off.
Zihix blinked away the disorientation and targeted the damaged fighter, delivering a final burst that turned it into expanding debris.
Target neutralized,
he reported, his voice shakier than he would have liked.
Excellent,
Peter exclaimed.
Now for the main event.
Zihix's head snapped up in alarm.
What? No, we've completed the mission. 3 fighters destroyed. We need to retreat before we take serious damage.
We're already committed,
Peter replied, swinging their ship around to face the pirate vessel directly.
Their shields are at 70% from that last exchange. We can take them.
That's a capital ship,
Zihix protested.
We're in a fighter. This isn't just reckless, it's suicidal.
Only if we die,
Peter shot back with infuriating logic.
Look, I've done this before. They have a predictable firing pattern. If we make 3 close passes, we can weaken a specific section of their shields and target their engines.
Before Zihix could argue further, Peter had already engaged the thrusters at maximum, hurtling them towards the pirate vessel. The larger ship's point defense systems open-fired, creating a deadly web of energy that Peter somehow navigated through with great precision. The maneuvers were even more extreme than before. Zihix felt himself losing consciousness again as Peter executed a tight spiral around the pirate ship's port side, evading most of the incoming fire while bringing them close enough to deliver a concentrated barrage against one shield section.
"Shield management!"
Peter shouted, the words barely penetrating Zihix's fading awareness.
"Divert power to rear shields for the withdrawal."
Zihix managed to comply before darkness claimed him again. This time, the blackout lasted longer. When he came to, Peter was already setting up their second attack run.
Peter, wait!
Zihix gasped, still fighting the effects of the high G maneuvers.
We need to slow down. I can't...
His words were cut off as Peter rolled their fighter to avoid a heavy laser barrage, sending them into another spiraling approach. Zihix focused all his remaining energy on the weapons and shield controls, trying to be useful in the brief moments of clarity between the graying of his vision. By some miracle, he managed to lock onto the previously weakened shield section and launched a missile just before passing out again. The last thing he heard was Peter's enthusiastic praise.
Perfect shot! That's my wingman!
When consciousness returned, Zihix expected to find them retreating at last. Instead, the pirate vessel filled their view screen, still very much intact and now focusing all its considerable firepower on their small craft. Warning indicators flashed across the cockpit as their shields began to fail under the onslaught.
"We need to retreat,"
Zihix shouted, panic rising in his chest. Not fear of the simulated death that awaited them, but fear of losing his ranking. Every point of damage they sustained would count against their final score.
"We've done enough."
Just need to survive 2 more close approaches,
Peter replied, his voice strained for the first time as he wrestled with the controls.
We've already weakened their starboard shield grid. 2 more passes and we can break through. Target the engines.
Zihix wanted to argue, but another wave of dizziness swept over him as Peter executed yet another hard maneuver. The simulation's neural interface was faithfully reproducing the physiological effects of extreme G-forces on his zooaxian physiology, and his body was failing him. His next return to consciousness came with a surge of panic. Not fear of dying, the simulation couldn't actually harm them, but the realization that they could still achieve a high score if Peter would just retreat now, instead of recklessly trying to destroy a capital ship with a fighter. They had already exceeded mission parameters by eliminating all 3 escort fighters. Why risk everything for an impossible kill? But Peter showed no signs of backing down. Each time Zihix regained awareness, they were still engaged with the pirate vessel, their own ship taking more and more damage as they pressed the attack. Warning signals blared throughout the cockpit, systems failing one by one. But Peter was only demanding more and more from the vessel, accelerating it to its very limit. When Zihix awoke yet again, it was to a blinding flash that filled the cockpit with white light. For a moment, he thought their ship had been destroyed, that they had failed. But as his vision cleared, he realized what he was seeing. The pirate vessel breaking apart. Its reactor core breached, secondary explosions rippling along its hull. A surge of elation washed over him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had destroyed not just the escort fighters, but the capital ship itself. It was unprecedented, the kind of victory that would surely catapult them up the rankings. His happiness lasted only a few seconds amidst his confusion. As full consciousness returned, he became aware of the state of their own ship. The damage indicators were no longer flashing. They were solid red. Hull integrity compromised, engines operating at 15% capacity, life support failing, weapons offline. They had won, but at what cost?
"You broke your promise,"
Zihix said, his voice barely above a whisper. Peter turned to him, sweat glistening on his simulated brow, an impressive detail for the program to include.
"What?"
"You promised not to destroy our ship," Zihix said, anger building. "The penalty for this level of damage will ruin our score. Everything we gained by destroying that vessel will be negated."
Peter stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable.
"We just pulled off something no other team has ever done in this simulation, and all you can do is complain about points?"
He shook his head.
"Maybe we really are incompatible as a team."
Before Zihix could respond, the simulation ended, the virtual environment dissolving around them. He tore off his helmet, not waiting for Peter to fully disengage from his own interface, and stormed out of the sim room. His mind raced with calculations as he marched towards the ranking displays. How far would he fall? 8th place? 12th? Would he even remain in the top 20 after such a disaster? He reached the main hall, his eyes immediately drawn to the giant leaderboard that dominated the far wall. Both his antennae and his jaw dropped in shock. There, displayed in glowing red numerals for everyone to see, was his name, now in 6th place. He had moved up 4 ranks, not down. It made no sense. The damage penalties should have been catastrophic, yet somehow their performance had been deemed exceptional enough to overcome them. His role in destroying 2 enemy fighters and contributing to the destruction of a capital ship had earned him additional points that outweighed the penalties.
"Surprised?"
Zahix turned to find Peter approaching him from behind. The human raised his hand, as if to place it on Zahix's shoulder, then stopped himself, clearly remembering their earlier interaction.
I didn't come here unprepared,
Peter explained, his voice devoid of the smugness Zahix had expected.
I knew the penalty for destroying our ship was slightly less than the points we'd gained for taking down the big pirate vessel and all of its fighters. It was a calculated risk, not just recklessness.
Zahix could only stare at him, struggling to reconcile the methodical strategist with the daredevil pilot he'd just watched in action.
Anyway, Peter continued, our business is over. You're a good pilot, Zahix. Very good at keeping your composure under pressure. But I don't think our personalities are compatible for a real fight. He turned to leave. Good luck with your rankings.
Peter retreated without saying anything else. Zahix watched him go, a whirlwind of thoughts tumbling through his mind. This human had just given him exactly what he wanted, a significant boost in his standing, a guaranteed attention from the females of prestigious lineages, perhaps even a commendation from his superiors, and he'd done it not through recklessness, but through careful study and precise execution. Something suddenly changed inside him. Before he realized what he was doing, Zahix was already running after Peter. He reached out and grabbed the human's sleeve, causing him to look back in surprise.
"We could achieve a lot together,"
Zahix said, the words spilling out before he could overthink them.
"I assumed you would fail. I assumed wrong."
Peter's expression was guarded.
That much is clear, he said, but I still think we're too different to be partners. Your priorities are not the same as mine.
"All that matters are the numbers,"
Zahix insisted, gesturing toward the leaderboard.
"You benefit from this too. I don't know how human culture works, but surely this kind of performance will earn you recognition, advancement."
Peter shook his head.
I don't think my boss is worried that much about a simulation.
Zahix tried again, reaching for anything that might convince this confounding human.
"Being recognized as the best pilot across so many homeworlds must have some benefits. Perhaps it would help you find a human mate."
Peter laughed then, a genuine sound that echoed through the hall.
You've assumed something wrong again, he said. I'm not looking for any human mate. He extended his hand for a proper handshake. I'm also not very interested in simulations. I wouldn't even have done today's if it wasn't mandatory.
Zahix shook his hand this time, feeling the strange warmth of the five-fingered grip. In a last attempt to convince Peter, he asked,
"Wouldn't being recognized as the best pilot in our corner of the galaxy at least help you keep your mate, if you already have one?"
Peter's laugh grew louder.
My amazing body and my even more amazing sense of humor are enough to keep her, he said,
his eyes twinkling with mischief.
Being such a humble man also helps.
Zahix said nothing at his joke, simply accepting that perhaps because of his own wrong assumptions about Peter being just a reckless human pilot, or perhaps just because of bad luck, he had lost the chance to work together with the best pilot he had ever seen. The realization stung, but not as much as the recognition that in judging this human so quickly, he had embodied the very close-mindedness he had always despised in others. As Peter walked away, Zahix remained by the leaderboard, watching his name glowing in the 6th position. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, and somehow it no longer seemed quite as important as it had just an hour ago.